What if the answer to feeding people on a hotter, drier planet was already hidden in a dusty jar on a kitchen shelf? What if a tiny desert bean, so tough it sets pods in 115-degree heat, and so protein-rich that by some measures it rivals beef, was quietly waiting for us to remember it? This is the story of that secret seed, how it survived deserts and missions, how it almost vanished, and why it might matter more than ever. Archaeologists digging in the dry washes of the Tahawakan Valley found something that stopped them. In ancient hearths and rock-lined storage pits, millet-like chaff and charred grains are common, but these sites yielded whole, preserved seeds, small, pale, slightly flattened, that looked nothing like the corn or common beans archaeologists expected. Genetic analysis of the material suggested deep domestication, a lineage shaped by human hands for millennia, pushed and pulled by cycles of drought and monsoon. Radiocarbon dates place domestication at roughly 5,000 years ago. The seeds belong to a crop recorded in colonial and oral sources as the temporary bean, term in archival notes, orthography may vary, a desert-adapted pulse that formed the backbone of seasonal diets across arid valleys long before industrial agriculture. How did a plant that co-evolved with human communities for thousands of years fall into near oblivion? That question follows the archaeological reveal like a second heartbeat. The answer lives in climate and culture, in the slow steamroller of colonial missions and the later hum of tractors. Missionization introduced foreign grains and livestock and rewired ancient land use. In the 20th century, mechanized agriculture and subsidy-driven programs favored large, uniform crops that fit machines and markets. The temporary bean did not lend itself to wide-scale combines. Its irregular growth, short season pulse, response to erratic rains, and the knowledge required to manage it, planting into dry washes, capturing flash floods and simple earthworks, staggering sowing windows for 2 monsoon cycles, were at odds with an industrial script. As fields changed, knowledge frayed, but the seed itself did not completely disappear. Through the mid-20th century, the plant persisted in jars and pockets, in the hands of a handful of seed keepers who refused to let it die. Ramona Button, name is recorded in archival notes, orthography may vary, kept family seed jars beneath a low shelf. Farmers like Terrell Dew Johnson and Sterling Johnson, name is recorded in archival notes, orthography may vary, carried small packets in their saddlebags and told their children stories about a milky way of beans that painted the night with abundance and old harvest tales. Those stories, oral testimony rather than archival proof, tied the crop to identity and seasonal life. Without those stewards, the bean might have vanished entirely. What makes this plant so remarkable beyond its survival story is its biology.
Modern researchers, responding to renewed interest in the 1970s and especially during the droughts of the 1990s and 2000s, began to test its limits. Field trials measured several traits again and again: astonishing heat tolerance, rapid maturation, exceptional water efficiency, and a relationship with soil bacteria that reduced fertilizer needs. In one set of trials recorded in archived reports, the plant was able to flower and set pods at temperatures above 115 degrees Fahrenheit, temperatures that cause pollen sterility in many staple crops. Its life cycle is keyed to pulses of rain. After an early monsoon pulse, the plant can mature in roughly 60 days, making it ideal for climates where moisture is unpredictable. Leaves that fold and reopen with stress, deep-reaching roots that tap transient moisture, and a physiological economy that emphasizes seed production over lush vegetative growth all contribute to survival where corn, soy, and common beans struggle. Nutritionally, the seed is similarly surprising. Laboratory analyses recorded in project notes put its protein content at roughly 25 grams per 100 grams of dried seed, numbers that place it in the same neighborhood as many animal proteins when compared by dry weight. That figure needs context. Comparisons between dried plant protein and fresh meat are not apples to apples without clarifying moisture content and culinary preparation. But the headline stands as a provocation worth investigating: a compact, storied seed that can deliver high protein on a small environmental footprint. Trials also found that per unit of water used in cultivation, the seed delivered substantially more protein than some conventionally grown legumes. Researchers recorded water use efficiencies that in some comparisons were less than 1/3 of that for soybeans under similar testing conditions. Those numbers are preliminary and specific to trial conditions, but they point to an important truth. In a landscape where water is the limiting resource, protein yield per drop matters. There is another quiet benefit to this crop. Like many legumes, it hosts nitrogen-fixing bacteria in root nodules. This biological partnership reduces the need for synthetic fertilizers and helps rebuild tired soils. Farmers who rotate the seed into degraded fields reported firmer, livelier soil in subsequent seasons, an observation that modern soil tests supported with modest increases in soil nitrogen in trial plots. In that sense, the seed is not only food, it is a soil doctor, a piece of a regenerative system that restores fertility while feeding people. Preliminary laboratory work also identified a set of protease inhibitors, compounds that in petri dish studies have been observed to affect certain cell lines. Scientists describe these findings cautiously, early in vitro results that may inform future research, but do not translate into clinical claims.
The transcript cautions, and rightly so, such molecules are interesting biochemical leads, but they are not medical endorsements. The story here is one of biological complexity, an ancient pulse with a suite of traits that modern biochemistry is only beginning to unpack. The human story complements the biological one. Indigenous cultivation systems around the Tahawakan and neighboring valleys were built for uncertainty. Planting into ephemeral washes harvested the brief rains. Simple stone terraces and brush and earth barriers slowed sudden floods and funneled moisture to seeds. The crop's two-monsoon cycle meant that community food rhythms were synchronized to the land's pulses. Elders recounted that in good years, the plant's pale pods would hang like a Milky Way across terraces, an image that linked abundance to cosmology and season. More than calories, it carried recipes, medicines, rites, and identity. Colonial forces disrupted those systems in predictable ways. Missionization introduced new food regimes and property norms. Livestock grazed where pulses once grew. Irrigation initiatives privileged cereals suitable for export. Later, mechanization privileged large fields, straight rows, and crops that conformed to the cadence of machines. Subsidies and market signals amplified those preferences. Over decades, the agricultural landscape reoriented. A mosaic of diverse, well-adapted local crops narrowed into a patchwork of a few commodity staples. Knowledge that was embedded in place, when to plant after a flash flood, how to stagger sowing to spread risk, was treated as inefficiency. The result was cultural and ecological erosion. Yet the story arcs toward revival. As drought steepened, as commodity yields faltered under heat and water stress, communities and researchers began to listen again. In the late 20th century, seed keepers who had safeguarded heirlooms started sharing again. Ramona Button and the Johnson families opened jars and remembered planting techniques. They taught younger farmers how to read the landscape for microcatchments, how to time sowing to the dispersed rains, and how to harvest a crop that does not always look like industrial expectations. This revival was led from within communities and supported, never supplanted, by partnerships with universities and research centers. Trials reintroduced the seed into smallholder plots and school gardens. Community food programs rediscovered recipes that blended the pulse with local greens and dried meats. Scientific trials compared water use, protein yield, and soil impacts. Some universities and international agriculture centers began cautious breeding programs that sought to maintain the seed's resilience while reducing traits that complicate mechanical harvest. Importantly, these were framed as collaborative research, not appropriation. Local seed sovereignty groups insisted that genetic material and traditional knowledge remain under community stewardship.
The results of those recent trials were encouraging but pragmatic. In test plots where drought and heat were simulated, the seed outperformed corn and common beans in pod set and final yields on marginal soils. Researchers measured that in plots exposed to prolonged heat spikes, where corn tassels and bean flowers failed, this pulse kept producing. It fixed nitrogen, required less irrigation, and matured fast enough to escape late-season desiccation. Nutritionally, the seed's protein content made it an attractive option for diversifying diets where animal protein is expensive or environmentally costly. Again, all of these findings were presented by researchers with appropriate caveats. Trial-specific results do not equal universal promises. Still, the data suggested a path forward. Crops need not be uniform or global to be useful. A diversity of locally adapted seeds can form a resilient diet mosaic. There are broader implications. Industrial agriculture favored scale and predictability at the expense of diversity. That made short-term economic sense in many contexts, but it increased systemic vulnerability to shifting climates. Seeds like this one remind us that resilience often lives at small scales, in farmer-managed seed systems, in patchworks of field types, and in the slow learning of place-based agriculture. Reintroducing such crops into diets is not a silver bullet. It cannot, by itself, replace large-scale livestock production or remove the need for systemic policy changes, but it can do three things extraordinarily well: increase local food security under extreme heat, reduce pressure on water and synthetic fertilizer inputs, and provide culturally meaningful pathways for communities to steward their own food futures. Respect matters in this work. The seed's survival is inseparable from the people who tended it. Scientists who enter this field must negotiate truthfully. Validate indigenous expertise without claiming discovery. Build partnerships that respect intellectual and cultural property, and prioritize community-led control of seeds and knowledge. Where archival labels and botanical names are unclear, scripts and reports should note uncertainty rather than invent clarity. The archive itself, full of transcription errors and colonial spellings, is a poor substitute for the living memory of seed keepers. As we imagine the seed's future, a few practical avenues emerge. Community seed banks and school garden programs scale knowledge horizontally. More people learn to plant and preserve the pulse. Participatory breeding programs, led by elders and seed keepers alongside plant scientists, can select for traits that ease harvest without discarding resilience. Policy changes that value crop diversity, public procurement for school meals, incentives for water-saving crops, can shift markets to reward stewardship instead of uniformity.
And finally, support for indigenous land rights and local food systems is not a side note. It is the central requirement for any meaningful revival. The secret in this seed is not a miraculous cure or a mystical panacea. It is a slow, embodied intelligence encoded in genes and stories, strategies for timing growth to fickle rains, partnerships with soil microbes, compact nutrition in a hard shell, and rituals that kept planting knowledge alive across generations. That intelligence almost slipped away under the engines of profit-driven agriculture, but it was preserved in jars, in family lore, and in the small acts of everyday stewardship. If this matters to you, if you believe that food security in a hotter world will come from remembering and protecting the seeds that sustained people long before markets did, consider following this channel and sharing these vault stories. There are groups working now to support indigenous seed sovereignty. There are school and farm programs seeking partners. The work is practical and patient: seed banking, seed exchange, community trials, and policy advocacy. In the end, the point is not to fetishize a single species as a miracle. It is to remember a lesson the landscape has taught for millennia. Resilience is often local, relational, and conserved by communities who live with the land. The seed in question, referred to in archival and oral sources as the temporary bean, term in archival notes, orthography may vary, is stronger than corn under extreme heat and measured trials, remarkably water efficient, soil healing, and by some nutritional measures, comparable to beef in protein density. That combination is rare among cultivated crops and precisely why its revival matters. This is not a story about replacing entire food systems overnight. It is a story about humility and possibility. It is about a secret seed that carried 5,000 years of relationship between people and place, and about the choice to listen to that history now. If we choose to honor those relationships by supporting seed keepers, by funding community-led trials, by reshaping incentives toward diversity, then the secret seed might be less a relic and more a practical piece of climate adaptation, stronger than corn when the heat is unforgiving, rich in protein in a compact, low-water package, not a miracle in isolation, but an old, wise tool for a hotter future, waiting for hands that will plant it again. Share this story. Support the stewards. Remember the seed.